right? The instant generation. Okay, so
I forgot my breakfast, Miriam. I forgot. So thank you. Thank you.
so what I did want to print out, I'll say a few words on, and then we'll switch to what I wanted to teach, which I wasn't able to print. So the first thing is a mashal that almost doesn't make any sense to people today, because it's like it's so obvious, but especially we've learned so much in Torah to Nefesh, so we know that this is not so obvious actually. The mashal goes like this, and actually it would have been good to have a translation. He says, first of all, we're learning on Ha'azinu. Sorry, I didn't mention that. We're not learning like on Yom Kippur directly. We're learning on this week's parsha, which we will read on Shabbos. In the middle, we'll have Yom Kippur, but it's related to these two subjects that we'll talk about now. Yom Kippur is related to these two subjects. So the first one is that the Baal Shem Tov gave a mashal, and he said that there was this old lady who, it's a well-known mashal from him, a well-known parable, that she was very poor, and she lived on the outskirts of the town. Like then it was, the nobleman had a castle or a estate, and then the lands were rented by different people. It's like a more feudal system. And then the people who lived really on the outskirts were already in the woods, and they also rented the land from the nobleman. So this old lady, she was very, very poor, and she had nothing. So she went around and she made her living from tzedakah. But whoever gave her anything, she used to say, whatever you do, good or bad, it comes back to you. That's like that was her saying. Whatever you do, everything that you do, I'll say it in Hebrew just to make sure that I'm getting it right. She would give no thanks to somebody who would give her something. Rather, she would say, "Kol ma she'adam poel atzmo." Whatever you do back to yourself, whether it's good or bad. And there's two different versions of this mashal. That's why I was a little hesitant. But when you put them both together, so what she's saying is, whatever you do, whether it's good or bad, you're doing it to yourself. Okay? And then the story goes that one day she was led into the nobleman's estate, and she went to the noblewoman who was there, and she gave her money, and she was very happy. But she didn't say, as usual, she gave no praise, but she said, whatever you do, whether good or bad, you do it to yourself. And the noblewoman didn't take this very well, and she was angry with her. But she couldn't do anything now, so she let her go. And when she came back the next time, she told one of her servants to prepare a cake for the next time she would come. And in the cake put poison. It would kill her. So she was so angry at what she had said. So, she comes back to the noblewoman after a couple of days. And she says, this time I want to give you something else. I want to give you a cake. So obviously she didn't say, thank you. She said, whatever you do to yourself. So she took the cake, she went home, and she looked at it, and it was very, very beautiful. How many cakes did somebody back then see? But she thought, it's so beautiful, I want to enjoy what it looks like for a while before I eat it. So she didn't eat it yet. It says that same day, the noblewoman's son was out hunting, and he got lost. And when he finally made his way back, he was in the forest, on the outskirts of the forest, and the only light he saw was her house. So he walked in, and she was so happy to see him. She says, you don't know what a dear woman your mother is, and she always gives me something when I come to her. She didn't give any praise to her, but not in front of her. She said, she's such a wonderful lady. So here I have something that actually your mother gave me today, and I can give it to you. So he ate from it, and he died on the spot. And she was, of course, aghast. She didn't know what had happened. So she ran all the way back to the estate. She woke them up, and they came, and the noblewoman saw that he had eaten from her cake. She said, now I understand what you meant. when you said that whatever a person does, he does to himself. Whether you do good or you do bad, it comes back to you. So that's the famous. It's a very famous parable. He said, Baal Shem Tov said it in a number of different occasions on different ideas.
But this is what the God will say at the end. We did so much. So Shem says you did it for yourself.
So that's one way of understanding that I do it for myself in the sense of I want to take credit for it. Here, what she says is more like what you say in English: what goes around comes around. Like however you act to others is actually you're acting to yourself because it will come back to you.
And what was it in Hebrew again? One more time, I just got the follow up.
She said, "Kol ma she'adam poel poel le'atzmo." Anything that a person does, he does to himself. So, one of the things that this is meant to establish in our minds, to really strengthen in our minds, is something that was very hard for people to understand, I think, in the Baal Shem Tov's time, because there was so little social mobility that it almost seemed like there was nothing that could move you from where you were. It was like life was almost predetermined from birth to death. And there was very little that you could actually change. And so your actions didn't seem to be so significant. So one of the things that he wanted to impress upon people, and this was especially true, today we can't even, I don't think we can even understand this, but it was especially true on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that the minhag back then was to rely entirely on the chazan, that the chazan is the one who prays for me. For us, that's almost inconceivable. We can't even begin to not only can't we conceive of it, we can't stand it. Like we can't, somebody else is going to, usher me through something. Maybe when you're sick and you don't have any strength anymore and you're tired and you're this and you're that, you're willing for somebody else to take responsibility for you. But the whole notion of taking responsibility for what you're doing, I think, was very distant back then. So this is one of the series of mishalim that he wanted to impress on people, that for them to go out of their way was already, first of all, to even believe that my actions make any kind of impression on the world. But not only do they make an impression on the world, but they're actually what comes back to me. That was all. I think it was almost inconceivable back then to give so much credit to the power of your own actions. I think it was a very novel, like a very novel idea, and really ahead of its time in that sense. For us, it's almost clear. Okay. What I want to say is that in terms of Torah Nefesh, really, what he's saying here is the very important notion that you can't blame anybody except for yourself. And that in the end, you're the only one who caused yourself harm. There's nobody else to blame but yourself for what has come to pass in your life. And that's one of the big principles, right? We talk about a lot in terms of rectifying the ego, that the ego wants to throw everything, all the responsibility off, and blame somebody else. In the end, blame Shem even for all the things that happened to us. Okay, so that was the thing that was translated, and that's on one of the psukim in the Shira. Do shichet lo banim mumam. Lo banim mumam means that their blemishes are of their own making. The mum that they have, the blemish that they carry, they did to themselves.
This is from where?
That's from Ha'azinu. It's one of the psukim in the Shira. Okay. Right, it was yesterday. It was the beginning of the Shira. Shichet lo banim mumam.
Even if you've won it?
So it's easier to stick to the things that happened in our lives and to explain everything else. Right, lo banim mumam. The mum comes from the banim themselves, and that's how it is explained.
If you've won it, it means that something in your past life caused you.
So that's how it used to be explained. Today, we just see it as a challenge, I guess, but that suits the personality, that somehow fits what the person needs to do in the world. Okay, but now I want to come to the one that I do. It's a very interesting thing. It's on the verse that says there's a verse in the Shira that has 5 times the word I. Ani, 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 ani. And in the end it says ani machatzti, ani amit v'achayeh, ani machatzti v'erpa. So what does he mean? He means to say, I will put to death and I will bring back to life. So one of the, again, Shem says this. Ani machatzti v'ani erpa. I crushed and I will heal. I crushed and I will heal. Heal. H-E-A-L. So this thing in
What's
the
the fifth time? That's 4 times.
no, there's I don't know how it begins. No, here is only twice. Ani amit v'achiyeh, ani machatzti, ve'ani erpa. That's 3 of them. Ve'ani erpa. So the amazing thing about this is what the Baal Shem Tov brings on this. Ani amit ve'achiyeh. So it says in the Gemara, in Psachim, that this is one of the verses in the Torah that alludes to Tchias HaMeisim, to the resurrection of the dead. There's a whole question about why something so central as Tchiyat HaMetim, resurrection of the dead, is not mentioned clearly in the Torah. Many things are mentioned clearly. The fact that there is reward and punishment, and the fact that Mashiach is hinted to, right? Also. But the one that's really not even the hint is very far. About the Mashiach we could ask, so how is it that it's Bilam who teaches us about the Mashiach? And there's other places also hinted to. Yaakov also, Shaltcha kiviti Shem, and there's also this idea of Mashiach in what he said to the tribe of Dan. But about the resurrection of the dead, there's really nothing that even it's not in context. Every time you take these allusions, they're always taken out of context in some way, or verses that are read wrong, or something else. It's just not stated in any clear way. So there's a whole question about this. Why is it that the resurrection of the dead is not discussed at all? Well, how could something so central not be part of the Torah? So the Baal Shem Tov says, first of all, he quotes that Chazal say in Psachim that this is one of the allusions. Ani amit v'achayeh. I will put to death and I will bring back to life. And it doesn't say it the other way around, which it should have. Right? It should have said, I give life and I put to death. But now it says, I put to death and I bring back to life, so you have to read it that somehow this is alluding to life after death. So it's very interesting that the Baal Shem Tov brings in this case the Rambam. Okay? And what does he bring from the Rambam? So everybody, I think it's pretty famous, that the Rambam holds that the resurrection of the dead is not a permanent state. Right? He holds that what will happen is that at some point God will bring back the dead and put the soul back into the body, but for what purpose? For the purpose of giving it reward for what it did in this world. Why? Because he says in this world, even the rewards that you receive, even the good that you receive, is very limited, and it's always beset by some kind of trouble. It's never full, it's never complete, it's never real reward. Okay? So it's always taxed in some way. It's like income tax. Even when you get something, they take away from it. So he says that's not how Hashem wants to feel. So at some point he's going to just give you a reward, and there will be just infinite reward. But to give you infinite reward, since the soul acted inside the body, he has to bring you back the way you were when you did the mitzvah, when you did the good thing. So for him, the whole purpose of resurrection of the dead is only to offer reward in a complete sense, so that it's physical reward. But he says, but eternal reward or an eternal state can never be in the body itself, because the body is always falling apart. It's always ready to die. So according to the Rambam, the people will be resurrected, the soul will come back into the body, and they'll live 70, 80 years, and they'll die again. And then the soul will go to its eternal abode in heaven. That's the Rambam story. Why? Because the way that you can join eternity, or you can enjoy eternity, is only through something spiritual. So it can only be the soul that becomes eternal. He doesn't believe in the possibility of an eternal form of a body. He doesn't accept that at all. And he has many proofs for it, why this can't be.
But the Ramban and Hasidus.
Right. Say the answer. So it's very interesting that here the Baal Shem Tov uses Maimonides, the Rambam. It's almost like he accepts this, but you'll see in a moment where he takes it. He takes it to a different place altogether. So after the Rambam wrote his book, the Yad HaChazakah and his Parashat and the Mishnayos, he received questions from around the world. He became relatively famous. He wasn't as famous as he is today, but he was relatively well known. So he received a number of questions about this whole issue of resurrection of the dead. And he was asked, why is it not in the Torah? Okay, he was asked this question. It says, really, who makes a big deal out of the resurrection of the dead? So it's the prophets and Daniel. Daniel is really the biggest source. There's clear psukim that say you're going to pass away and you're going to be resurrected. As the Malach tells him, that you will stand up to your fate at the end of days. And after that, Chazal, after that the sages. So the Gemara is full of it. And the Rambam makes it, because the Gemara is so full of it, so the Rambam makes it into one of his 13 principles of faith. So still he was asked by many people, especially from one particular place, which here he doesn't want to mention, but if you read his response, so it's not such a big mystery. But since Baal Shem Tov didn't say wherever they were from, so I won't say it either. And there's epistles of the Rambam. One of them is called Igeret Tchiyat HaMetim, the epistle about Tchiyas HaMesim, about resurrection of the dead. And there he responds to all the communities that sent him questions about the resurrection of the dead. Now the Baal Shem Tov here, he told his disciple, in this case it was Toldos Yaakov Yosef of Polana, he told him that really the real answer the Rambam didn't want to send. He didn't want to write it himself, because the real answer is very, very harsh. So he wrote an answer where between the lines he gave the criticism to those people who asked him.
And who's the he here?
The Rambam, in his epistle, answering all these communities that asked him, where's the source in Torah and so on, he gave an answer, but he wasn't as harsh as he wanted to be.
Harsh about what?
About, you'll see what in a moment. But his answer was call it, it was to the point. It was inyani, how to say inyani. It was not ad hominem, it was about the topic. He didn't answer to the people about telling them, explaining to them, why is it that you're asking this question?
And what exactly was the question? What's the source?
How do we know that there's Tchiyas HaMesim? Because it's only the sages or the prophets that talk about it. This, says the Baal Shem Tov, for the Rambam this was very painful to hear. Because what do you mean it's only the sages that say this? What do you mean it's only the prophets that say this? If it's not in the Torah? It was very like, he took it very, and you read in his epistle that it troubles him a lot, but he doesn't tell them off. He doesn't speak ad hominem. He doesn't tell the people, this is what's going on with you. And this is where this question came from. Instead, says the Baal Shem Tov, he left this for his translator. And he had a famous translator, Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibon, and there were a whole family of Tibonim, they're called today, and they invented the Hebrew that was used to translate the Rambam into Hebrew, because the Rambam wrote his letters and his Pirush and the Mishnayos and the Moreh Nevuchim and all his major works except for the legal work he wrote in Arabic. So, and Arabic was a very developed language back then, more developed than Hebrew. So there had to be a special class of translators who also had to invent whole new structures in the Hebrew language in order to accommodate the philosophical language he was using. Okay?
Now
So
I understand there's a street called Hatibonim.
Right, the Tibonim right here, next door.
What's this word?
Tibonim,
I
Ibn,
can find it.
they're all called Ibn Tibon, the sons of Tibon. That was his name. But with the Taf, Taf Yud Bet Vav Nun Yud Mem, Tibonim. So the main one, the one who translated, and the Rambam had a relationship with him, was Yuda Ibn Tibon. So he translated most of the works of the Rambam, and he had to develop. A lot of the words that we use today, he basically invented. He didn't invent them without any basis. He used what Chazal used, and then he further expanded the Hebrew language using the structure that already is in place. So all this is very interesting. What did Yudat Ibn Tibon answer to them? He said to them, he explained to them like this. And this goes back to the beginning of the pasuk. Ani machatzti v'ani irpa, ani amit v'achayeh. I crushed and I heal. I put to death and I give back life. So the word crushed, ani machatzti, is understood in the Medrash. There's a Medrash in Koheles that it's understood to mean, machatzti means I set up mechitzot. It has to do with sukkahs. That I set up divisions in the world. Mechitzot that we use for the sukkah are like the panels, right? The walls that we put up to separate the sukkah from its surroundings. So a mechitza is something that separates. It's separation. So I set up divisions in the world. I set up things that would distinguish between things in the world, and I will also heal these very divisions. What's the first division that God made in the world? Between light and dark, right? What was the second division that he made? Between the higher waters and the lower waters. All these things he has to heal, because the purpose is not for everything to stay divided, but rather for the mechitza to lead to something greater, and once it's not needed anymore, you can take it down, right? So it's almost, you can say that at the end of Sukkot, when you take down your sukkah, so it's because the whole world has become a sukkah already. You don't need a mechitza anymore. It's already, everything is already holy. Everything is, all the ananim that are coming now during the winter, they're going to be the same as the clouds of glory that surrounded the Jewish people when they were in the desert. That's when they had a big sukkah. They didn't need to put up mechitzot to have a sukkah. So how is this connected? So says Yehuda ibn Tibon, he writes to them, he says like this, the way of the world is such that when you eat, so your body goes through a series of divisions. It begins to divide out the food. It says the waste, right away it divides out. So you have to go to the restroom once in a while, and the body immediately throws the waste out. Afterwards, even though we don't exactly have the same picture today, but we understand it's still very relevant. Afterwards, the body begins to take out the better parts, right, the nutrients, and the more enlightened or the more delicate or the higher function an organ serves, the more it has to receive from things that have been filtered even more and even more until you get to the brain. And when you get to the brain, they didn't know about the blood-brain barrier back then. They had no idea about it. But they knew somehow, because again, it makes sense, that the brain had to get the most filtered. Right? It has to get the most filtered nutrients. There shouldn't be any kind of waste in there. And he says to them, so after all these divisions, he gives 5 different divisions that the food goes through until it reaches the brain and your thought. And he says to them, because you're not careful about kosher food, so your brain is tainted.
Wow.
Because he says, just as the body does this with the physical aspect of food, the physical aspect of food is that the brain has to receive the cleanest nutrients, the most nutritious nutrients. So, in terms of the spirit, and the spirit holds on to the brain, and it's nourished in the same way, if the food spiritually is not kosher, right? It's not something that's permitted by the Torah. So finally, in the end, when it reaches above and it goes, the body doesn't know how to tell the difference between kosher and non-kosher food. But whatever is good, it brings up to the brain. But because it's holding on to it some kind of klipa, so that taints your thinking, specifically your spiritual thinking. So it says, from that come all your doubts regarding the sages. That the very fact that you could ask this question, that's how he says, the very fact that you could ask this question about whether or not Tchias HaMeisim is real, only because it only appears in the sages, says the Yehuda bin Tibon, that's a problem with your food. It's not a problem with your thinking. Your thinking is fine, because maybe it's logical. Maybe you're asking, but to say that you have a question because it's only the sages that say this, that doesn't work. You can ask where in the Torah is it hinted and so on, but to put, and it was much more than that. They actually, in these communities, there were spiritual leaders, I guess, I don't know, you could call them back then rabbis, they weren't exactly rabbis, but whatever they were, who were darshaning, who were teaching that what the Rambam had written about Tchias HaMeisim is not necessarily true, and you can take it all as a parable. You don't have to actually believe that anything like this will actually ever happen. So that's
the time of the Rambam.
That was in the time of the Rambam.
In different communities.
I don't want to say. You can read it, and here's Tchias HaMeisim, because he didn't say it. I don't want to say it. I don't know. Everybody knows who they are.
But the Rambam said who they were.
Yeah, in the thing. He mentions a few different communities. In the end, he gives a hint to which one it was that he was really angry at. I don't know where this letter from Yehuda ibn Tibon is. He just quotes it here, and he says it. So says the Baal Shem Tov, so that you should know that this whole issue of being able to accept faith is related to food. That's what he wants to take from here, and specifically to what? To this idea of setting up divisions. Okay, set up. So it's a well-known. I don't think it's such a big chiddush. What we just said, everybody knows this. Metamtem talev. That's what Chazal say, that when you eat non-kosher food. So, and again, it's not because you become smarter or dumber. It's not about being smart or not so smart in your IQ level. It's about your ability to integrate faith, whether you can connect to faith or not, whether you can be ma'amin or not.
But this
So
is
all this
said
is.
in the Torah that the blood of a non-kosher animal is not allowed because the blood affects, no? What does it say?
Kind of, all these things, all the different things that the Torah said not to eat is because in the end it's not that maybe physically it'll harm you, although it could also be physical. But again, the sages tell us you shouldn't say that a person who's never eaten a ham in his life doesn't have to say ham is disgusting and it's not healthy. Like you say, it's very good for you. It's actually one of the healthiest foods in the world. The Torah told me not to eat it. I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows.
Once a doctor told my mother to give us shrimps,
Huh?
but it's so healthy.
But she didn't.
No.
But
Somehow
not
she
by
did.
cleanse.
What?
So let's say you were
Oh.
religious when you grew up. So can you actually?
Oh,
does that always stay
so that's where we're going. That's
So
where
the
we're going.
nations who don't observe the laws of kashrus, is that why?
So they can't accept faith. They can only accept
if they kept
things.
kosher, what would happen?
So they would change. They would become believers.
Really?
And that's an understanding here, that the ability to have faith is related to the ability, and let's make it more clear, it's the ability to set up divisions. It's not just the kashrus. Really what he's saying is that the whole idea of faith is that there's a particular part, right? Where do we put faith? We put it at the highest level of the crown. To reach there, you have to have a whole series of divisions before between the habitual and the emotional, and not everything that's habitual has to come up to the emotional, right? Not everything that's emotional the brain has to let through, and you have to actually think and have to actually act on. And then there's your will, and then there's what you take pleasure from, and finally in the end there's this faith. And you want to feed faith, you have to give it like a whole. You have to be careful about giving it the best. You have to. You have to. It's very pure. It's a very purified state. It's not something that's just an everyday thing. This thing called faith. It's like the sort of like a way to think about it might be that on a nuclear submarine, right? You can't just keep the nuclear reactor in somebody's room. It has to be in a certain part of the ship, and it's locked away, and there's all these curtains, mechitzot around it, all different the walls and protections, and all kinds of, and it's very purified, and the whole thing there is every gram of the rods that they use, and it's a whole thing. So it's not just anything can go into that, right? That's where everything is driven from. So it's very purified. So the same thing with Torah in general. So it's not so much the fact that the goyim don't just keep kashrus. It's that the whole system is very parutz. There's no walls anywhere. They do whatever he wants. So when they had faith was when there was much less. Going back to the previous story, the parable that he gave, when there was a lot less social mobility, when people were sort of stuck in different places in the social ladder, right? You were a nobleman, or you were a small nobleman, you were a simple person. Today, when there's not so many divisions in that sense, so even the idea of having any kind of faith and authority falls apart. Mm-hmm. But to have faith in a certain sense requires this idea of divisions. Okay, so it's not just kashrus, it's the whole way of thinking. It's the whole way of thinking about things are permissible, things are not, things are better, and things are even better, and so on. What happens on Yom Kippur? So we don't eat at all. So what happens? So there's two types of vessels. There's vessels that are made out of metal, and vessels made out of clay or out of earthenware. Okay. And the vessels are made out of metal, so you can put them either through fire, or you can put them in, or you can heat them up, boil them, or whatever it is, and you can get the tumah out. But a vessel that's made out of earth, so you can never kasher it really, so what do you have to do? You have to break it. You grind it up. And once you grind it up, you can add water and make a new vessel, and then it's fine. You never have to remove the tumah that was in it, because you can't really even find it. But just breaking it removes the state of the tumah. And again, it's the same idea. It's not the food particle itself, but rather the spiritual value that it's carrying. So if it's carrying tumah with it, so once it's not in the vessel is what holds on to the tumah. The moment that the vessel is broken, the tumah just breaks away. What is man like? So human being is like earthenware, because man was made out of clay. Whether you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. It's the same biology. So for us, when we fast on Yom Kippur and we do tshuva, and how is tshuva done? Out of a broken heart. Mm-hmm. What does a broken heart mean? So I had this interesting conversation with my son this week.
Which one?
I have one who's 16 now. So he's learning in a semi-Hasidish, semi-Litvish yeshiva, somewhere in the middle. And he told me, he asked me suddenly, I was very happy that he asked me, he said, what do you do to prepare for Yom Kippur? So I told him, this year, like all years, it's terrible. All years it's terrible. It's never good. So he says, what do you mean it's never good? He says, because I don't think you can come prepared for Yom Kippur. To come prepared for Yom Kippur means that you feel broken. What do I mean by I feel broken? That I can't prepare. It's not in the sense of let me add more and more to my my resume. Because when it comes to Yom Kippur, what am I coming with? I'm coming with my resume, and before you have to tear whatever I do have, I have to tear it up, because that's what it means to have an idea, to have a lot more on your resume to be able to tear more up. You said, okay, I guess I might actually still do a few more mitzvahs before, but in the end, what am I coming with? I'm coming with a broken heart. I'm coming, and the fact that I don't eat is because, again, with a broken heart, you can't eat. It's not because I'm sad. It's because it's not shayach. It's not part of the whole day. It's a day of feeling that I am coming to you, Hashem, from a place of complete loneliness, that I have nothing to show. Okay? It doesn't matter what I have. I could be the biggest tzaddik in the world. Even the biggest tzaddik in the world, when he comes to Yom Kippur, so he says, "Lanu boshet apanim," and all we have is shame, because in the end, I can't compare myself to the infinite, and it's not the point for me to compare myself to the infinite. The point is, can I put myself in my real place? Can I really tear up all these things that I've gathered the whole year and think that I've amassed and possess, and all the mitzvahs that I've done, and so on and so forth? And I was very careful about this and very makbid about this, and say, "Oh, this is nothing next to you, Hashem," because in the end, next to the infinite, and life comes from the infinite. Life doesn't come because of my actions. And none of my actions know how to give life. I don't know how to give life to anybody. I don't even know how to give it to myself. So in the end, since it's coming from the infinite, I'm coming to you, Hashem. So I come before you with shame. That's all I have. I have nothing else. So to prepare for Yom Kippur really is how much can I gather the feeling that you, Hashem, are coming to me only if I'm willing to abandon all my accomplishments. If I'm willing to say I don't have any of these things. Yeah, so that's the basic principle. And I said, and I suspect that this is not how you've been taught in yeshiva. So he said, yes, in yeshiva what the feeling is that you have to amass things before Yom Kippur. I mean, you have to come with a really full bag. The more full it is, the fuller it is, the better off you are when you stand before Hashem. And I said, no, the whole concept of Chassidus is that to come before Hashem, all I can do is, if I do have a bag, I have to dump it all out. Maybe in Tashluch I did that. I'm not sure what I threw out in Tashluch. Did I throw out my averos? Did I throw out my mitzvahs? I don't know what I threw out. Whatever was there, I threw out. And you can continue doing this until Yom Kippur itself. And I come empty. Dalim v'rikim. That's how we come before you, without anything, without having amassed anything. What does that do? So, based on this whole idea, that the divisions are something that occurs during the regular process of the year, during the regular time of the year. The whole idea of fasting on Yom Kippur says, not only am I like not completely flesh and blood on that day, but I'm not letting myself go through the whole process of setting up these divisions. Divisions make sense when you want to say something is higher and something is lower. But in Yom Kippur, everything is at its lowest place. That's what I want to say before Hashem. Nobody here is higher than anybody else. We're all empty. The biggest tzaddik is also empty. He comes the same way. I can't say that for him, but he can say it for himself. I come before you, Hashem, without anything in my pockets. I have nothing to show for what you gave me a whole year, and I have nothing to show for it because there's nothing. I'm brokenhearted. So it's not just that I'm not eating in the sense of, well, I'm like everybody else, that we're all equal. There's nobody's eating more, eating less, or this or that. It's all the divisions make no more sense. It's like we're throwing out all the divisions, all the different gradations, all the different levels. Everything is like nothing. They just stand before you this way. That creates like a reset of the whole system. And There's two explanations of what it means that Hashem will use the same mechitzot to heal. There is that he heals like with like. That's one of the places, by the way, in Tanakh. We said there's 7 different places that Chazal say that he heals like with like. This is one of the 7 places.
What's one of them?
Ani machatzti v'ani erpa. That with the mechitza itself, this is one of the places they say this, with the mechitza itself he heals. Meaning he set up the division in order to heal with it. How do you heal with a division? So this is what we just said. That because there's divisions, so as you ascend higher and higher, you become more and more pure. And then, like in the question of faith, you get the highest level of nutrients or whatever it is, and then you get the pristine part of reality. So that's how the divisions are used to ascend higher and higher. And so the division itself becomes like a method of healing. Even though division by its own sense, the mechitza by itself sounds like machatzti. It's like to crush something. It's like that it's not for healing. It's for the opposite. Or like because of that, the lower waters, they keep crying, we want to be before Hashem, meaning they feel distant. But that distance itself, that's what causes them to ascend higher. That's what causes it. So the hardship itself is what heals you. Okay? You don't need more than that. Keeping the divisions is what gives you the pristine quality at the top. But there's another meaning to this, and the more simple meaning, which is that he heals by removing the mechitza. That he heals by taking away these divisions. That he heals by taking away this whole system of there being different gradations. Now there's amazing pshat from the Alter Rebbe that he brings in Likutei Torah. And he explains, and I think I've said this here before because it's such an incredible pshat. He says, when Rabbi Akiva went to Rome and he saw the wealth that they had and the good life that they had, so he said, Im le'ovrei retzono kach, le'osei retzono al achat kama v'chama. If for those who transgress his will, he gives such reward, so all the more so for those who do his will. So that's the simple pshat. The Alter Rebbe explains, le'ovrei retzono means for those who skip over all the gradations. Because when Hashem gave us the Torah, His will is to set up all these different divisions. This is mutar, this is asr, even within the mutar, this is mehudar, and this is not mehudar, and so it keeps going higher and higher. He says, the goyim, they completely ignore all this. They just go straight to action. They ignore everything that says, a Jew wants to do something, he has to ask, is it mine? Can I use this instrument? Is it Shabbos? Is it allowed to be used today? Is this my land? All these things. The goyim say, you have an instrument, go use it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whose it is. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter if it's a treif or not treif. There's no such thing. You just do whatever comes to mind. Oh, okay, there's also laws. So they put a few divisions in, but it's not the same thing as the divisions in the Torah. The Torah has far more divisions and separations between things that are prohibited and not prohibited and so on.
So it's still a negative state, okay?
So it's a negative state in the sense that they have no gradations. They have no levels. They just skip straight from whatever they want, straight to do whatever they want. And they have no questions in the middle. There's no refinement process asking about whether this is permitted or not permitted according to Hashem's will. So he says, if those who skip to the end, so it's very interesting. He says what they're receiving is a reward. It's a reward. It's not, don't think, because they're working. The Roman Empire wasn't born out of thin air. They worked very hard to create it. But they created it against Hashem's will. Or at least they didn't take it into account. And they created something wonderful. By all measures, what they had at the height of the Roman Empire in 30, which is probably, or 40 or 50, 60 CE when Rabbi Akiva would have gone there. So it was the height of human civilization. So it says, if those who skip over all the levels, they receive such reward because they worked in the world, they did something. they received a reward. It's a good reward. So all the more so those who are so careful, those who are so careful about all of Hashem's divisions. Because Hashem created this world to have divisions in it. So they'll receive, those who keep Hashem's divisions, those who keep the commandments, they actually receive more in the end. But, on Yom Kippur, what do you say? There's no divisions. There's no divisions. Like in my whole life, the fact that I don't eat is like saying I'm not involved in the process of separation on Yom Kippur at all. In fact, what are we like on Yom Kippur? We're like Moshe Rabbeinu was in the 40 days and 40 nights that he was on Mount Sinai. Like Eliyahu was in the 40 days and 40 nights that he walked to Mount Sinai. We don't need food and drink. Like we've gone to a different level. But we still have bodies. The Rambam, when he notes this, he says, you can't give me, because people claimed, here's a body that is physical and eternal. Because look, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't need to eat or drink. He could have stayed that way forever. So Rambam says, no. The point is, it was only 40 days and 40 nights. And the truth is, we can't even keep it. We can keep it for one day. We can't keep it for more. But sometimes, just to have a small example does prove the rule. That there is such a thing that will be eternal. So what is the world to come like? There's no divisions. There's no divisions in the world to come. Meaning in the after the resurrection of the dead, there's no asur and mutal. Hashem doesn't tell you this is permitted, this is not permitted. You can do whatever you want.
Isn't there references to like a good place and a not a good place? You hear like jokes maybe, but you hear have a good place, like in the bleachers or in the front row, you know? There's not such a thing?
I don't know. Maybe something. But the point is that the mitzvahs are no longer there. Meaning Hashem is not going to give you any more divisions. You can set up your own divisions if you want. And that's how the Rebbe says. He says the mitzvot betelot, meaning it's not a commandment, but people will still keep doing things, but not because of the division. Because the divisions he's going to tear out. So for instance, the division between the lower waters and the higher waters is going to be gone. And the divisions in the body, and this is the important part, it's not that you don't need to eat and it's not that you don't go through the process of eating because you don't need food. You don't go through the process of eating because the whole thing of dividing up the food and refining it is no longer necessary in the world to come. What we do on Yom Kippur, really, we're saying, is not that we're not eating because we don't need food, but we're not eating because the whole process of eating, the whole process of the body digesting food and distributing it to where it needs to go is a process of divisions. And that doesn't exist anymore. There's no divisions. Like we say about Yom Kippur, it's a day without machlokot. It's a day without disputes, which also means it's a day without classes, without differences between people. That whole idea that there's no differences here, it comes to play in the fact that you don't eat, because the main process in our lives, whether we like it or not, that is constantly dividing the world into different levels is our digestion. So we don't eat, and there's no eating in the world to come because there's no levels. These will all be gone.
When we say the Shem Yechot,
What?
when we say the Shem Yechot before bracha, before
Hmm.
mitzvah, this is not about us, it's about Hashem.
It's also about us, but I don't follow why it's connected.
Then
Why are you connecting it?
Why we say it's something
Okay,
different.
so,
So there's no Isser in after Tehiyas Amazing.
right. There's no Isurim. There's no divisions anymore between Asur and Mutal. There's actually a whole section in Igeris, in the Igros of the Tanya. There's a whole epistle about that, Kaf Hey, where he talks about the Zohar that says that in the world to come there's no Asur Mutal, there's no Tameh V'Tahol, and so on. And he explains what that means, because we go up to a higher level of understanding. So the way that it's understood today, they won't exist, but they'll exist in the mind. But they won't exist anymore in the
Because
physical
we'll naturally
reality.
do the right thing.
Oh, so this is where the thing comes, and this is where it's all leading to. You would think that in a world without divisions, so you can do anything you want. It used to be very clear. There was the nobleman, it was all social structure. Social structure is broken apart, maybe completely. Yeah, there's no more social structure in the world. You go and do and be whatever you want. In fact, there's no more physical structure. There's no more gender structure. There's no more structures. Yeah, even gender they're trying to tear apart. There's no familial structure. It used to be that things were forced upon you because they existed in the world. These divisions existed. On the highest day of the year, we say, no. Really, the highest way to live is without any need of these digestive divisions.
We'll be light bodies, just.
Yeah, but it also means there's no divisions. There's no structure. Without divisions, there's no structure. So you would think that everything becomes a free-for-all. But really what we're saying is that the burden of responsibility is shifted. That was the first story that the Baal Shem Tov tried to impress upon people. And that I said that 200 years ago, people trusted, they put their faith in the Chazan that he would take responsibility for the prayers. When there's no limits anymore, when there are no things dividing people, and forbidding or permitting something, everything becomes open and free. So the question becomes, who's going to take the responsibility? It's really just a shifting of the responsibility. Meaning, says Hashem, I put into the world many mechitzot, I put into the world many divisions to structure the world so that it would advance to a certain point. But at some point, it's up to you, when I take away these mechitzot, to set up the world in a way that makes sense. You can't let it fall into chaos. It becomes your burden to decide how you want the structure of the world to look. To choose no structure is like to let the world fall apart. To choose structure, so the question now becomes, which structure do you want? So says Hashem, what I would like you to come to a conclusion is that the same things that I've told you in the Torah that set up the original structure, they're just as good still. But I don't want them to come from me, I want them to come from you. In all areas. In every single area. Meaning that today people are not confined to be from because they were born from. Tomorrow they can decide that they don't want to be. It's up to them. What do you want to do? The burden is up to you. Meaning, if until now my body was the one that gave me structure, divisions and things going through a process of refinement, and it was built in, the moment that I don't need to eat and drink, so what gives me the mechitzos? What sets up the structure? So it becomes a spiritual thing, becomes a mindful thing. Becomes something that I need to think about it in my mind, and I need to meaning Hashem is giving me like a day to reset and to say, look, there's no structure, and then he says 4 days later, now set up a sukkah and build structure again. Structure. And he's saying right away, like, I gave you a day to reset the whole system with no structure at all, no divisions. Says about the whole thing about the digestion, which is the epitome of structure in the world, of divisions in the world, is gone. And now what do you want to do? She says, it's up to you. Build a sukkah. Build a sukkah is build a structure. It's restructure everything. But this time, obviously, if you want to build a sukkah, you want to restructure. So do it the right. How do you want to do it right? So I look in the Torah and I say, I want to build my structure based on how Hashem already showed me His. So really, every one of us is building a certain type of base of Mikdash, and it says it's mamish. This is an analogy that's brought in many places, that from the smoke from the incense that the Kohen Gadol would put into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, that becomes the schach in the sukkah. This is something that's brought in many places. Exactly where the source of the idea is, I don't remember. But it's based on the idea that all the ananei kavod that they had in the 40 years that they were in the desert came from that incense that went up. It filled the whole house, and then went up. It filled the tabernacle, and then it became the clouds above them. We mamish have that when we put the schach up. Meaning, what's the incense? So incense is something very spiritual. It's smell. It's not structure in the sense of it's a wall. Okay? What's above you is not exactly a wall, but the sides have to be walls that can stand against something spiritual. Okay? Meaning, med beruach mitzuyah. So there's no spiritual idea we'll just throw it off. It has to be able to stand. But really, after this day of having no machlokas, of having no mechitza, of having no difference between above and below, everything becomes one. So right away after that, he says, but you have to rebuild the world in the image that you think of. It's up to you. What image do you want? So the reason I've been thinking about this is because if you didn't read them yet, so read the two shiurim from Rav Ginsburg on what is truth, and the theories of truth. So the last one was very strong. It was about how the base of Mikdash represents the structure that we're trying to build. What is this structure? The structure is that Hashem will be present in reality in a physical sense. The metaphysical will become actually physical. But it's up to us. And the whole idea is that it's up to us. Meaning that Hashem won't reveal Himself in this world the way He used to, because the burden of responsibility has shifted. And He said it's no longer, He wants it to become our world. He wants it to become something that we build, that we convince ourselves and others that this is the best possible reality that we want to live in. And when I set up today a mechitza between myself and my teacher, it's not because I couldn't in a second tear it down and say he's a regular person like anybody else. He goes to the bathroom like everybody else. He doesn't have to have a God-given gift. It's my duty, and I see it always as my duty to set up this separation. Okay? It's in my head. What does it mean in my head? I think that it's real. But it's not something that came down from heaven. The same way the base of Mikdash is not something that's, again, for children to respect their parents today. There's no longer any need. It used to be that if you didn't respect your parents, so you wouldn't have a life. You'd be kicked out of the house. Because how long were you in the house? Until you were 9, 10. Anyway, until age 10 or 9, you couldn't get a life if you didn't respect your... But after age 9 or 10, you left. Today, there's this crazy thing that people stay in the house for a long time. They can be there into their 20s. How does a 20-year-old respect his parents? He's just as an adult as they are. So it has to come from him. He has to decide, I'm respecting my parents not because they necessarily earn more or they have more ability than me or they're this or they're that. I'm respecting them because I've decided that that's the type of world that I want to live in. Yeah? In the same way, my respect for Torah is not because there's no other wisdom out there. There's many wisdoms. A lot of stuff is very smart. How is Torah better? Is it because I've decided that for me to have a relationship with Hashem, I have to take the Torah. And even though there's all kinds of people who say the Torah isn't real and so on, I've said, I ignore that. It's my responsibility. Even though everything they say is false. But it has enough weight that it may seem that it's right. And so he says in the end, if you want to have emunah, you have to set up divisions. Now, how do you set up divisions after Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur, you tore them all down. But from now on, you have to build them. You have to construct them. You have to build your world.
So they say eating is a milchama. So when you don't eat, there is shalom.
There's no divisions. The biggest difference between what's above the main difference is the waste and the nutrients. And so, and clearly that's a parable for light and dark, for good and evil, and so on. We may have talked about this in the past. That was the root of Zoroastrianism, which was a dualistic religion, where there's a good God and a bad God. Everything above the what's it called, Chatzar HaKaved, the diaphragm. Everything above the diaphragm was considered to be part of the good God. Everything below the diaphragm was considered to be the bad God, the evil God, and because it's waste, and everything that goes up is nutrients, and so on. So all these things, they're torn down. They don't exist on Yom Kippur. So if you're going to have anything at all, it's up to you now. You have to build it. You come out of Yom Kippur and you have to right away. That's why it's such an incredible thing. The Shulchan Aruch says, when Yom Kippur ends, once Yom Kippur, what are you supposed to do?
Build the sukkah.
Start building the sukkah. Do something. Because you can't stay in a world. So Kiddush has also some kind of...
Why 4 days?
Why 4 days? It says, can I get Yud Kei Vav Kei? I guess you have to build all 4 worlds. It's not just the Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's the 4 worlds. So the first day is Asiyah. But then it becomes our responsibility. And that's what Hashem is doing. He's shifting the responsibility to us. That's what He's been doing for the last 800 years. Okay? But it's just become more and more intense, to the point where today you have to decide whether you're male or female, which is crazy. But medicine has given people the possibility of changing their sex, which is crazy. But look at that. So even that's a construct that you have to build. But you have to build it. You have to decide. Hashem is telling you, I'm taking down this all Yom Kippur. All the divisions are being cut down. And so if you want to build, you want to have holiness, and holiness means there's something separate. It's not going to come from me anymore, he says. It's up to you. If you want to have holiness in your life, make holiness. And by the way, that's why everything that's like wishy-washy, in my opinion, will disappear in the next 10 years.
Middle of the road.
For example.
Everything that's middle of the road will disappear. Like the Tilumi will disappear.
It's like this or that.
Like the Tilumi, like to be like modern Orthodox, it'll disappear. Why? Because it's not a strong enough construct.
That's right.
The construct is too weak. It's not a sukkah. It doesn't stand the winds. So I'm not saying that there aren't people who have a really well-developed construct in their minds of what's permissible, what's not. They're Haredi still. But
We're going to have one hechsher? That was going to...
No, I don't know if there'll be one hechsher. It might go in that direction. It might happen. That the most stringent in the end will always win. Why? Because you need something that's strong and stable. When you either are flushed downstream, or you build something that can stand. And so everything that's half and half in the end, or just not strict enough, it won't fall because you're not holy enough. Because people will feel this isn't doing the job. I don't want to live in a house that has flimsy walls. I want a house. And if Hashem's not building the house, so it's up to us to build a house. So I want to build a house. And it's amazing that what sticks today. It's really amazing. Where do all the Balei Tshuva go? They go into even though in their minds they're not stupid, but they go to the most strict direction. Like they go to people who 50 years ago nobody would have looked at. You think of somebody who looks like I don't know, the Lubavitch Rebbe. Why would anybody who had been through, I don't know, it's an intersection in San Francisco called Haight and
Ashbury.
Haight-Ashbury. Why would anybody who was there, like, connect with somebody who is definitely not from this century or any of the past few centuries? Why would anybody gravitate in that direction? Because it offers something that you don't have. It does. You have no walls, and he lives in a castle. So he says his walls are from ancient times. It's also very it gives you some strength in the beginning, but eventually you figure out you don't have those walls. And if you don't build them yourself, it doesn't help you that he has them. You have to build them yourself. Meaning he was born to Levi Yitzchak, who was born to the Rabash, who was born to this. For him, he's been in the castle for the last, how many centuries. So it's an inheritance for him. But for you, you don't live in that castle. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to come live in your castle. You have to build your own house. And if you don't build it strongly enough, it'll also fly off in the wind. So eventually everybody's going to look like this. Like, it's so clear to me, because it won't stick otherwise. It doesn't feel like a strong enough construct. Okay, so...